Hello, I'm Ben Higgins, a manager in the AMLCFT Supervision Division at the Authority.
And I'm Kinga, Chmielowska, an assistant manager in the AMLCFT Supervision Division. Today we're going to spend some time talking through the findings of a recent thematic project covering the business risk assessment, which is required by paragraph 5 of the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Code. There are a number of key points that are important to keep in mind as we progress through the presentation today. Firstly, it was a thematic exercise only looking at business risk assessments for TCSPs, specifically Class 4 and Class 5 licence holders. However, the learning points can be applied to all firms obliged to comply with the code. The thematic exercise was made up of two core phases. Phase 1 consisted of a BRA questionnaire being issued to 106 TCSP licence holders for completion. And then Phase 2 consisted of desk-based inspections. We will look at both of these in more detail throughout the presentation. There have been a range of findings from both phases. The Phase 1 report was published in July and outlines the results from the questionnaire issued. The Phase 2 report was published in January 2024 and covers the results and findings from the desk-based inspections, also highlighting some good practice points. We would encourage firms to read both reports and consider implementing the learning points as necessary in your firm.
I will now provide some background on where the project started. The sector was chosen as a priority due to being the highest AML-CFT risk sector in the NRA alongside CVCs and VASPs. Planning for the thematic began in 2022 with data analysis. Data from the AML-CFT annual statistical returns was received and considered given regarding the firm's most recent inspections, including the types of inspections, thematic, full, desk-based or on-site. The thematic also allowed us to work towards achieving our regulatory objectives, protecting consumers, reducing financial crime and maintaining confidence in the island's financial sector through effective regulation. Undertaking a thematic exercise such as this will assist and enable us to determine the island meets international standards and that the authority is undertaking supervision on the basis of materiality and risk. In utilising a risk-based approach, there are a number of different supervisory tools and methods that can be used by supervisors, including routine inspections encompassing AML-CFT matters, such as event-driven inspections, and also the use of thematic exercises, where the data, once collected and analysed, assists in informing the topic to be considered. Looking at the AML-CFT code requirements, paragraph 5 of the code requires that all relevant persons must carry out a BRA. It is vital to evidence their understanding of the risks they face and a key tool to establish and document a robust compliance and risk management framework to detect and prevent AML, CFT and PF. It starts with identifying threats and vulnerabilities in order to assess the inherent risks. Relevant persons must consider weighting the risks differently as part of their assessment. These threats and vulnerabilities aren't static, so firms have to monitor the operation of their controls and put in place improvements where these are needed. This then helps with the residual risk assessment. The business risk assessment must be revised and updated on a regular basis, particularly where there are any significant developments within the firm's environment or business structure and activities. Most importantly, firms must ensure it is documented with version of controls so changes and reviews can be tracked and evidenced where required. In summary, a BRA must enable firms to understand and manage their ML-CFT risks, and we will discuss this more as we go through the presentation. It is important to note that where a relevant person is estimating the risk of financing of terrorism, this should also include the financing of proliferation as described in paragraph 3 of the code, and is to be constructed in accordance with definitions of financing, terrorism and proliferation in section 3 of the Terrorism and Other Crime Financial Restrictions Act 2014.
Before covering the key findings of Phase 2, we will just spend a couple of minutes looking at Phase 1. Phase 1 was a data collection exercise which consisted of a questionnaire with 24 BRA and AML-CFT related questions. There was also a comment box available for each question, which allowed firms to provide some further context around their answer. This questionnaire was issued to 106 TCSP licence holders with a 2-week deadline for completion. The published Phase 1 report provides a detailed overview on the findings and observations on each question from the questionnaire. Whilst throughout this presentation we might pick out some of the key findings from Phase 1, the focus is mainly going to be on Phase 2 and the desk-based inspections. In terms of how firms were selected, prior to the questionnaire being issued, data from all regulated TCSPs was collated and analysed. As at December 2022, the authority's public register had 313 licensed entities, and then of these 313 firms, 122 were Class 4 and Class 5 licence holders. 11 of these firms were excluded initially as these firms held or did incidental TCSP activity, and Class 4 or Class 5 was not the firm's main business activity or focus. 5 firms were also excluded as they were in liquidation or known to be very near to surrendering their licences. This then removes 16 firms, with 106 TCSP firms selected to go on and form Phase 1 of the Thematic project. The results and data from Phase 1 was subsequently analysed, and it assisted us in selecting firms for Phase 2 of the Thematic.
Phase 2 commenced in February 2023. Our Phase 1 publication detailed that 70 firms had been initially selected to form Phase 2. These firms were selected on the basis of Phase 1 supervisory outcomes, recent supervisory inspections, and recent AMLCFT statistical return data. Phase 2 of the project consisted of desk-based inspections of a licence holder's BRA to assess compliance with the code, and also considered their procedures and controls in relation to the BRA. In accordance with our published inspection procedures and external guidance, firms were provided first with a draft report. They then had a period of time to review the draft report and provide feedback on its factual accuracy. A final report was then produced, and firms were required to advise how they plan to address any contraventions and relevant remediation. Any revised or remediated BRAs were not reviewed. Instead, firms were asked to provide a board attestation that the remediation had been completed to a satisfactory standard and conclusion.
Just for completeness, this slide shows the objectives of the inspections, which consisted of reviewing the BRA considering paragraphs 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3 of the code. We will now talk through some of the key findings in relation to each area of the objectives, and then provide some best practice points at the end. As mentioned, detailed findings are explained in the Phase 2 published report, and there are a number of charts setting out the findings, so we recommend you read through that. Overall, the majority of firms inspected had 0 or fewer than 2 specific code paragraph contraventions identified.
Moving on to paragraph 5.1 of the code, which requires an assessment of risk to be conducted. Overall, this was an area where there was high compliance with the code. Where there were findings under 5.1, this was mainly due to a poor risk methodology and or significant deficiencies in the required risk factors under 5.3, which we will come to shortly. A key area for consideration under both 5.1 and 3 is that firms should consider and document within their BRA how their business might be abused for money laundering, financing of terrorism, proliferation financing, and the controls and measures in place to combat and prevent criminals and misuse. In some cases, firms only documented a high-level general overview of the business, failing to identify and document the AMLCFT PF risks and vulnerabilities associated with their unique business, customers, products and services. Providing a small or non-specific narrative of the firm in its business sector is not sufficient to comply with the code. Considering paragraph 5.2 of the code, it requires the BRA to be undertaken as soon as possible after the business commences. It must be recorded and regularly reviewed to ensure it is kept up to date. Overall, the authorities officers observed high levels of compliance in relation to paragraph 5.2 of the code throughout the Thematic. In considering how often the BRA was reviewed, the authorities officers also considered firms' compliance with paragraph 4.1ai of the code, which requires the operation of procedures. A common trend was that this would be considered poor practice observed by the authorities officers, was where firms would state their own procedures and controls in the BRA would be reviewed and updated at least annually, and additionally when internal and external material events occurred. However, the authorities officers then saw in some instances during Phase 2 inspections that some firms would only document and evidence reviews and updates of the BRA within a given calendar year, which differed from what was stated in the procedures. Finally, a point we have raised with some firms was ensuring a version history was included. Version history allows the relevant person to easily display and track compliance with the code from the inception of the document or since the AMLCFT code 2015, which came into operation on the 1st of April. Reviews and updates of the BRA can then further be evidenced through retained copies of the BRA and board or senior management meeting minutes. We have included an example version history in the Phase 2 BRA report, which we hope will be useful. The third objective of the inspections was to consider paragraph 5.3 of the code, which sets out certain risk factors to be included within the BRA. The authorities officers saw mixed levels of compliance in relation to paragraph 5.3 of the code throughout the Thematic project. However, generally, more positive than negative outcomes were observed. The published report explains this in detail by each risk factor. I will just provide a high-level summary. Some firms did not include all of the risk factors required by paragraph 5. This was confirmed to us on phase 1 of the questionnaire by some firms, and in others we identified this as part of phase 2 with the inspections. Those key areas not included were details of the NRA and the customer base / CRAs carried out. Although these areas may have been briefly mentioned in some cases, there was not enough detail and further assessment undertaken in the context of the firm. Paragraph 5.3b of the code requires consideration of the island's NRA, where relevant persons have contravened this paragraph of the code. This was resulted from not having any regard to this risk factor or providing very little narrative around it. There's a lot of detail in phase 2 report to assist with this risk factor. Paragraph 5.3f of the code requires firms to document an assessment of the CRAs carried out under paragraph 6 of the code. The BRA should make reference to the firm's customer base, particularly highlighting higher risk relationships and the proportions of the customer base such customers represent. The statistical outcome and findings from the CRAs carried out by the firm should be included within the BRA. The authorities officers saw in some instances that while the relevant person explained their CRA process and risk ratings utilised, the BRA did not assess or analyse the overall outcomes of the CRAs carried out. It is important to remember that the list of risk factors is not exhaustive, and firms should consider and document and assess all relevant risk factors that expose the relevant person to ML and FT risk, even if not expressly included in paragraph 5.3 of the code. 29% of firms confirmed they did this in phase 1 questionnaire.
We just wanted to end by discussing some of the good practice points highlighted in the report. I won't read them all out, you can take these away to read, and they are explained further in the Phase 2 report. Overall, make sure across the firm there is a well-organised policy and procedure library. This will aid both the firm and authority on further inspections. The BRA is vital in setting out a relevant person's risk appetite and the need for risk-sensitive AMLCFT mitigation procedures and controls, for example CDD procedures. Therefore, it's imperative that the BRA is tailored to the specific business being assessed. Clearly document the assessment using well-designed methodology and explain the methodology utilised in the supporting policy and/or procedure. Ensure it is dated with a detailed version history and review the assessment regularly in line with procedures. All of this will assist in demonstrating compliance with the code. We hope you found this webinar useful. If anyone has any specific questions regarding this thematic project, please contact our AMLCFT Supervision Division using the email address on the screen. As highlighted throughout the presentation, further guidance and information can be found in both the Phase 1 and 2 reports, as well as the AMLCFT handbook.